The other day, we were having a conversation in here on another subject, and I mentioned what our core responsibilities are as state legislators, and they include upholding our constitutions, both state and federal, representing our constituents, and above all, making good public policy. This vote, for me, will be a very easy one, since I know that this is not good public policy, and that the overwhelming response that I have received from my constituents has been in opposition. The House of Representatives spent 14 hours debating this issue, so I imagine there's not a whole lot that has been left unsaid. But one thing I noticed when listening is that I was astounded to hear that even among the proponents of what could only be described as a radical increase in the minimum wage, there seemed to be a tacit understanding that it will indeed hurt some people. That actually gives me hope that they can see and understand the basic functions of economics at work. The current state of our state's economy is an unfortunate but perfect example, especially when you compare it with other states. The states that are around us are recovering and rebounding at a much, much faster rate than we are in Connecticut. And thank heavens. In fact, I believe it is the national economy that is keeping Connecticut afloat at this time. It's no secret that Connecticut has a reputation as an anti-business state, and that we are struggling. People are leaving our state. Businesses are leaving our state. And people that I talk to in my district feel like they are being forced out. And they're not rich people or poor people or middle-class people. They're people of all walks of life. Of course, now, this year, the threat of more damage to our economy is before us, with talk about tolls, a budget that will certainly contain maybe $1 billion more in taxes on our constituents, a forced payroll deduction in the form of family medical leave, and the bill before us, a huge, steep increase in the minimum wage that's not founded in science or research, simply a campaign slogan masquerading as public policy. The whole idea of a minimum wage is a debatable issue by itself. But even among people that see value in having a minimum wage, if they are being honest, I think at this time, Connecticut in 2019, with a shrinking population that's looking to escape as a result of lack of jobs and opportunities, as a good place to make such a change, a radical change. 50% increase in the minimum wage in less than 5 years. And I have not heard from the proponents of this legislation exactly how this is supposed to play out. Surely they know that not everyone who is working for $10.10 an hour currently is going to end up better off as a result of this. I want to make a point about economics. A couple of rhetorical questions, for instance. First, is there anyone in this room or anyone listening that would pay $30,000 for a $20,000 car? You wouldn't. Would you pay $150 for $100 worth of groceries? No, you wouldn't. Would you pay $150,000 for a home that's only worth $100,000? You wouldn't. So why does anyone think that an employer will pay someone $15 an hour for a job that is only worth $10 per hour? And I just want to make a point that I mentioned job. I didn't say a person worth $10 an hour. I don't put people in categories like that. But businesses, when they are figuring out their finances, determine how much a job is worth to them. That's how business works. Business owners are constantly making calculations to determine the best way to run their company. That is their job. And when they hire someone, they're calculating the value of the work that they need their workers to accomplish versus the production that they are going to produce and all of their other expenses. And they create the jobs that are out there in our world based on that criteria. When we get together as a government and increase the minimum wage, it's really important that we understand what the result of that is. And it is not that people who make less than the minimum wage are automatically going to get a pay raise. Experience tells us that that's not what happens. And it will not happen in this case. So what will? Every job that exists right now that pays below what the minimum wage will be if this law is enacted will be immediately eliminated. At least in the legal marketplace, which is a whole other topic of conversation that maybe I'll touch on again, since the discussion of an underground economy as a result of a high minimum wage is a real subject worth talking about. And I'm not saying that everyone who works for 1010 right now is going to lose their job. That's not what I said. I said that every job that is worth 1010 an hour, that it currently pays 1010 an hour, will be eliminated. And essentially that's because of the law we're passing that makes it illegal to have a job for 1010 an hour. So not everyone that works for 1010 will lose their job, but they will lose the job they had. Because that job is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So what will happen? Businesses will be forced to adapt. And this will mean that since they can no longer create jobs for less than the minimum wage, and therefore no more 1010 jobs, they will have to restructure their business in a way to make new jobs that pay at least the minimum wage. And the end result is that while some people might benefit by getting one of those new jobs, and their job might change from being a 1010 an hour job to a $15 an hour job, many more people will simply lose the job that they had. And this is my issue with this bill, is that increasing the minimum wage essentially eliminates choice and freedom. And that's for both employers and employees. Because a job is a voluntary relationship between citizens that is our duty to represent. There will, whether this passes or not, be people who are willing to work for less than whatever the minimum wage is, and there will be employers willing to employ them. And we are essentially making that relationship that would be voluntary and by willing adults illegal. And the result of that will be a negative impact on our economy. And the loss of those low-paying jobs will result in more people fleeing our state. It will also result in more people out of work who are going to look to the state for more benefits, furthering the vicious cycle we are in now, where we have an expanding population of people that are receiving benefits through social services rather than working. It also creates an incentive, as I mentioned a moment ago, for people to create under-the-table jobs. Those that are seeking a great book to read to understand basic economics and how the minimum wage really interacts in a state or government's economy ought to read The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. It was written in 1776, a great year. And I just took one quote out of his book, and I hope you'll bear with me while I read it. It says, "When an independent workman, such as a weaver or shoemaker, has got more stock than what is sufficient to purchase the materials of his own work, and to maintain himself he can dispose of it, he naturally employs one or more journeymen with the surplus, in order to make a profit by the work, increase this surplus, and he will naturally increase the number of his journeymen." And I know that we're talking about weavers and journeymen, but I think it's clear. He goes on to say that an increase in production leads to an increase in profits, which then allows for an increase in the demand for workers. This is the natural way jobs are created, and demand for higher wages can come about. The demand for those who live by wages therefore necessarily increases with the increase of the revenue and stock of every country, and cannot possibly increase without it. The increase of revenue and stock is the increase of the national wealth. The demand for those who live by wages therefore naturally increases with the increase of the national wealth, and cannot possibly increase without it. It's clear that imposing an artificial limitation will only stifle a percentage of the overall production of wealth, and therefore stifle economic growth. Now, of course, Adam Smith was talking about nations, but that applies to every business itself, and also to the state of Connecticut. When you have less production, you will therefore have less wealth and less opportunities. I want to take a second just to correct a bunch of fallacies that I've heard while discussing some of our state's economic policies and this subject of the minimum wage. Like the concept of wealth. What is wealth? Some wealth exists in a natural form, like resources, oil in the ground, precious metals, and so forth. But most wealth is created. And that means created by work. Turning trees into houses, for instance. That requires work and production. Some people would have us believe that there is a finite amount of wealth in the world. And they want us to believe that if some person has a significant amount of wealth, then that means that they are taking it from someone else. And that's just simply not true. We are so fortunate to live in the greatest country on this earth. And compared to the first 100 years of the United States of America, there is absolutely no comparison in our entire human history of a period that has a greater period of prosperity and economic growth. If you think about the European countries that immediately preceded our revolution, England, France, Spain, so forth, they were agricultural societies more or less, and they did trade, but not on a great extent. America, on the other hand, when we began, is a place that had free market capitalism and unfettered opportunity for the brave and courageous people that settled here. And that's why we thrived. We thrived based on that freedom and innovation. Some of the greatest inventions in the history of mankind were created during that first 100 years of America. The discovery of electricity, the electric light bulb, the telephone, the radio, the TV, indoor plumbing, the automobile, the tire that goes on the automobile. You could go on all day about things that we have, indoor plumbing. These things all came into reality during that period of time. It led to the amazing quality of life that we all enjoy in 2019. And we benefit from the existence of these things that we have because of those great pioneers that took the freedom that they had to make great wealth. And yes, I mean great wealth. There are some folks that became unbelievably wealthy that we couldn't even categorize today. You think of Rockefeller or Carnegie or Howard Hughes. Yes, there was significant income inequality, which is a term I hear all the time. But their extreme income inequality also employed thousands and thousands of people. And we should realize that when you're discussing economic terms and you're saying things like economic inequality, it does not happen in a vacuum. Everything is connected to everything else. And when I hear that income inequality is a bad thing, I say to myself, but that is the thing that drives economies. If people were all in the same exact financial situation, why would anyone go through the trouble to try and improve their situation? Why would they go out and create the next best thing? Why would they work so hard to achieve another goal? What's bad is not income inequality. What's bad is poverty. And those are two entirely different things. And you know what fixes poverty? Not an artificial minimum wage that will not work because business owners are not going to pay people more than the job is worth. It's not social programs that are created by taxing one group of people to give the money to another. You know what fixes poverty? Economic opportunity, a thriving economy. Freedom is what fixes poverty, not the artificial rules that stifle economic growth. And that's really the basis for the difference in our political parties, I think, more than anything. I really appreciated the comments that I heard from Senator Winfield, and I am certainly sympathetic to his experiences growing up. But I would submit that a higher minimum wage would not have changed that situation. The best thing that could have happened would have been freedom and opportunity reaching all levels in all places in our society. And that is what I come here for, to make public policy that creates freedom and opportunity for everyone, that is colorblind, that creates opportunities for education and jobs no matter who you are or where you come from. And that's my main issue with this $15 minimum wage bill. It prevents free people from exercising their freedom to associate and make a voluntary business arrangement with someone else, aside from being nothing more than a campaign slogan or bumper sticker. There is a difference between what is good campaign rhetoric and what is workable public policy. You know, Senator Winfield also talked about FDR and the origins of the minimum wage policy. But I would also encourage people to look up something called the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. And this is where we get our prevailing wage laws that exist today. But it's also the basis for how the minimum wage works. But if you read about the Davis-Bacon Act, what you understand is why it was created. It was not to advance a certain group of people by giving them an artificially high wage for the job they're doing. It was designed to prevent other people from getting jobs because they were willing to work for less. It was designed to protect a certain group of people from others who would come and take their jobs and opportunities because they were willing to work for less. Minimum wage laws adversely affect the underprivileged parts of our society. You heard me say that. Research it. Understand the Davis-Bacon Act, and you will see that very clearly. That's the exact opposite of what I'm hearing why we're doing this. How is it exactly helping our state and improving the quality of life of our residents? It's not. And the people in my community can see that. I have received countless emails and calls expressing great distress over the fallout of this policy if it's enacted. I have a stack of them here. I'm just going to read a couple of the highlights. Thomas Shaw, who owns Tri-Valley Equipment in Prospect in my district. If we have to bring in entry-level young employees at $15 per hour, that will leave less room to grant raises to my skilled labor. Freezing their wages will drive them out of the state and make it harder for me to compete with out-of-state employers. That's a real thing, happened to a real business in this state in my district. The reduction in labor costs would be achieved through reduced jobs, reduced hours, or reduced benefits, impacting the very people these proposals are trying to help. Brendan Kane, he owns 3 Burger King franchises, including one on Queen Street. I would be left with no other options than cutting labor hours in half by laying off and not hiring. Bill from Cromwell, I don't know how he got into my emails, that's not my district, but nonetheless. Stop trying to fix this state on the backs of the small businessmen by creating more tax revenue through us. Don't forget that along with the wage increase that I'll have to pay, my work comp will go up, my taxes will go up, my costs will go up from my gas, my 12 cars in my local store to the guy that plows my driveway at my office. Who is paying for all of this? My customers, he says. And what are they going to do when I raise my rates? Some will leave. Some are going to stop calling me. Please think about that, he says, before voting on this bill. There are a lot of these. I'm not going to read them all, but they're from people that work in nursing homes, people that own all kinds of small businesses. Steve Briotti, he's a realtor in town. My business relies on a lower minimum wage. Otherwise, I would have to cut my staff hours. I don't want to read all of these. It will kill local businesses and hurt our economy, says Vivian from Prospect. I highlighted a couple. I just want to get there. Here's somebody that works at YMCA Camp Sloper in Southington. Our camp serves 3,200 kids each summer, and we employ 190 staff to serve these campers. If we were to increase the minimum wage for all our staff to $15 by 2022, that would equate to an increase in staff wages of $260,000. If we pass this cost on to our families, many of them will not be able to pay for their kids to go to camp any longer. And there's one other thing I want to mention that came out in today's news, actually, in my district. There's a headline. It says, Waterbury Company will be forced out of Connecticut with $15 minimum wage. And I have actually been emailing back and forth with, I don't know if he's one of the owners, but his name is Mark Polinsky, and the business is called Forum Plastics, LLC, out of Waterbury. Forum employs 145 people, many of whom are paid minimum wage to manufacture plastics for medical device companies. He sent me an email he got from Dayton, Texas. As interim executive director of the Dayton Community Development Corporation, I would like to request a conference call to discuss the advantages of moving to Dayton, Texas. Here's the business. This guy announced today he's going to move his business, 145 employees in Waterbury, somewhere else. That's a real thing. That's not just some rhetoric. That's not some me up here saying, oh, it's going to hurt businesses. This is a guy who runs a business. I know that my colleagues will do a really great job speaking on the direct results and impacts of this policy. And I'm sure they're going to talk about the effect on entry-level workers, the impact on summer camps, amusement parks, how it's going to affect the cost of everything that we purchase, and how it's going to impact people on fixed incomes. I am hopeful that their compelling testimony is enough to cause those in this room voting in favor of this bill to reconsider. The bill has already passed the House, and I presume that the governor will sign it. So that means that it's only us, the people in this room, that have the power to stop this dangerous policy that will impact our state for years to come and stop it from hurting our constituents. This is not the answer. Connecticut is at a tipping point. It's about whether people are going to decide to stay or leave. It's about whether businesses are deciding to stay or leave. We all see it happening. I have argued day in and day out that we need a new and different path than the one that we are on. Every policy that we discuss in this room should be measured against whether or not it makes our state a more attractive place to live, to work, to start or relocate a business, or to retire. If the answer is no, then you vote no. On the bill before us, Madam President, the answer is no. And I will make just one final comment and remind everyone here that the best way to give everyone in our state a raise is to reduce the size of government spending and to cut taxes. That would be a plan I could get behind. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Will your